Hey guys, today we're going to be reviewing how to find roots when we're factoring trinomials when our a value is equal to 1. And what you have to remember is that in standard form, a trinomial is ax squared plus bx plus c. So this is a trinomial, and in today's lesson we're only going to deal with trinomials where the first a value is 1. So our first example is going to read x squared plus 8x plus 7 equals 0. They have to be set equal to 0 in order for you to solve. And we're going to figure out how to factor this trinomial. So we've done this before. You're going to have two sets of parentheses, and you're going to start by breaking up x squared. Now, x squared can only be broken up by x times x, which is why in your parentheses you're going to have an x in the first part of each parenthesis. Your next part is to figure out factors of 7, because 7 is your c value, that add up to your b value of 8. So when you list all your factors of 7, you're going to have 1 and 7, and that's it. Now, because 1 plus 7 equals 8, those are the factors that you're going to use, and you're going to have plus 1 in one of your parentheses and plus 7 in the other. And the whole thing is still equal to 0. So we have factored the trinomial. Now we're going to set each factor equal to 0. So one of our factors is x plus 1. So we'll have x plus 1 equals 0. And the other option that we have is x plus 7 equals 0. Once you set each factor equal to 0, you are then going to solve for x. So you can subtract 1 and subtract 7. And your final answers are going to be x equals -1 and x equals -7, and we'll just bubble them in so that they stand out. And those are the roots. And if you're not quite sure what a root is, remember that when you were graphing these quadratics, they look like these U-shaped parabolas, and in this particular case it's actually going to look more like this, because in this parabola, it has to cross the x-axis at two different points, at -1 and at -7. And that's what we just solved for. Okay, on to question 2. So for question 2, our next example is x squared plus 4x minus 12 equals 0. So the first thing that you can do is write your two sets of parentheses. It all equals 0. And you're going to start by splitting up x squared. So that can only be split up by x and x. Then you are going to list all of your factors of c. Now in this case, your c value is -12. The negative is important, don't forget about it. But when you start listing all your factors, it's best to always start with 1 and work your way up so that you don't forget any numbers. So we'll start with -1 and 12, because one of our factors has to be negative. And then we'll do -2 and 6, -3 and 4, And I know I've hit them all because I would have started to repeat my numbers. So the question is, do any of these factors add up to my b value of 4? And hopefully you see that it's -2 and 6 that's going to work. So in my parentheses, I have to have a -2, so -2 in one of the parentheses, and a +6 in the other set. Once I have factored correctly, I am then going to set each factor equal to 0. So one of my factors is x minus 2 is going to equal 0, and the other option is x plus 6 equals 0. Now I just have simple one-step equations to solve. So in the first one, I can add 2 to get x alone. In the second one, I can subtract 6 to get x alone. And my final answers are going to be x equals a +2, and the other option is x equals a -6. So this particular parabola would cross the x-axis at +2 and -6. Okay, we're just going to do 2 more examples. Make sure we get the hang of it. Number 3 is going to read x squared minus 13x plus 40 equals 0. By now you probably know the drill. You're going to have 2 sets of parentheses. It's going to all equal 0. You're going to break up your x squared term by x and x. And then you're going to list all of the factors of c until you figure out what adds to b. So our c term here is +40. So I'm going to start with always 1 be the first one, so 1 and 40. 2 is going to work, 2 and 20. 3 won't work, so I'll move on to 4, 4 and 10. 5 and 8. 6 doesn't work, 7 doesn't work, and 8 will work, but I've already used it, so that's how I know I've listed all of my factors. Now, my numbers have to add up to a -13. Now currently that's not possible, but if I made all of these factors negative, they're still going to multiply to a +40, and now hopefully you see that one of these options will also add to -13, and that's going to be -5 and -8. So because they have to both be negative, I'm going to have in my parentheses -5 in one set, -8 in another, and I have factored, so now I just have to set each factor equal to 0. So I have x minus 5 equals 0, or x minus 8 equals 0. And now I can solve for x in each equation. So when I get x alone in the first equation, I would add 5 to both sides. When I get x alone in the second equation, I would add 8 to both sides. And I'm going to end up with my final answers of x equals 5 and x equals 8. And this quadratic would cross the x-axis at 5 and 8. And I have one more example for us. So this would be example 4, and it's x squared minus x minus 56 equals 0. If you want to pause the video now and try this on your own and then check your work against mine, you can, or you can just go ahead and follow along with me as you've been doing. So, first step, we are going to put our 2 sets of parentheses down, and it all equals 0. Then I'm going to break up the x squared into x and x. Now when I list all of the factors of negative 56, I will start with negative 1, positive 56, negative 2, and 28. 3 doesn't work, so negative 4 and 14. 5 doesn't work, 6 doesn't work, negative 7 and 8. And then the next one would be 8, and that is repeating itself. Now the question is, do any of these add up to our b value of negative 1? Currently they don't, but one of them adds up to positive 1, and since I just need that to be negative, I'm going to switch the signs around. So if I have positive 7 and negative 8, that's going to add up to negative 1 and multiplied to negative 56, so that's how I know that works. So one parenthesis needs to be plus 7, the other needs to be minus 8. Then I can set each factor equal to 0, so I have x plus 7 equals 0, or the other option is x minus 8 equals 0. And I have to solve for x in each equation, so I would subtract 7 in one equation, add 8 in the other, and my final answers are going to be x equals negative 7 and x equals 8, and again, these x values are where our quadratic is going to cross the x-axis. And that's going to conclude our notes for today.